As we just heard from the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, he is not backing down on making these changes to industrial relations laws. And it all comes down to collective bargaining and the concerns that business groups do have. They've had these concerns since the Job Summit months ago, and now they're ramping up an advertising campaign. So now I'm joined by the National Party leader, David Littleproud. This is where the debate's going to be this week. We've heard from Jackie Lambie, we know David Pocock is locked in meetings all week. But what's your primary concern here?
Well, it is the collective bargaining and the unintended consequences for small businesses, the people who employ Australians, not government. That's the reality of this. And what we've got to understand is the pendulum is going to swing too far back in favour of the unions, and it means that small businesses will have to make a determination whether they can continue to afford to keep people employed. So we will probably see people lose their jobs out of this, and there is no simple solution to lifting wages, and it takes a lot of effort and policy around trying to get there. And that's firstly about trying to make sure there's an opportunity for employment and Australians can get a job and there's competitive tension in the marketplace, and we've got that finally. But what this government is trying to do is to bring small business into a situation whereby they're going to be unable to compete and to be able to continue to be able to employ people to the extent they are now. And so while this might seem like the Labor Party sprinkling fairy dust and giving everyone a wage increase, and Australians believe in that, just understand that the simple solutions are never sustainable, and what you need to do is be careful, and you also need to be looking at real wages. And this is where the government has dropped the ball, particularly when you look at what's happening with inflation, with energy prices, with grocery bills and with your mortgage bill. So while they might give you in one hand, they're coming out the other, because you're going to have to stump up $2,000 between now and Christmas just in increased cost of living, because this government's not focused on trying to bring down those pressure points for you. When you say drop the ball, you're saying there should have been cash handouts in the budget? Well, no, and what I'm saying is I think they've dropped the ball particularly on energy, whereby the supply hasn't been addressed. They haven't looked at supply. They've known that this was an issue around supply well before they even got into government before May, and that they haven't addressed it. And effectively, we've seen prices continue to rise. They've taken money out of the budget that takes away more exploration of gas to put more supply into the system, and they aren't investing in the physical constraints of pipelines to put more gas into the system. And it's a simple supply and demand, and if you don't lift the supply, then prices stay up. And that's why I'm saying, while we want to see real wages increase, we want to see wages increase, it's got to be sustainable. You just can't sprinkle fairy dust and think that it's all going to be okay, because the unintended consequences will be long and Australians will foot the bill. If it was that simple, your government may have done a little bit more about it before the last election. But I want to ask you as well, to play devil's advocate here, haven't some businesses created a bit of a rod for their own back, where over the last couple of years they've seen record profits but wages haven't grown? Do you concede that, there's some sections of the business community that haven't done the right thing? Now they're facing this push. Yeah, and I think particularly big business, but small business in particular, is the backbone of employment in this country. What can be done about that? If you can see that big business haven't really done the right thing, they've seen record profits and haven't passed that on to their workers, what do you think can be done about that? Yeah, and we've got to strike the balance, because unfortunately what happens is if they don't make big profits, they don't reinvest back in their business and they don't create more jobs. So you've got to strike the balance here, and this is where the independent umpire, the Fair Work Commission, should be the one that makes the determinations, not giving the right of vetoes back to unions and giving them the power. This is where striking the balance is important, and I take umbrage. I used to work for a big corporate that you would see the executives get paid millions of dollars, not just in salaries but in bonuses, and have little effect on the profitability of the company in many respects. But we live in a free market society. I think that's where shareholders can take a particular angle towards it. But government policy should be about making sure that there's an independent umpire that gives that balance, that strikes the balance, and makes sure that the unintended consequences of bringing small business into the same IR policies as big business will have unintended consequences. Unintended consequences will see people lose their jobs and businesses go out of business. And that's not the Australian way, and that's not sustainable in what the government's trying to put forward. And that's why the two independents are being quite sensible about saying, let's try and work through this, let's strike the balance. I mean, small farmers will get caught up in this. This is how dangerous this policy is. So I think Australians might think there and think this is the silver bullet. It's not. They'll end up footing the bill either with their job or higher cost of living.
Yep, we'll see where that ends up. It doesn't seem like it's got any chance of passing this week, but we will see. David, just before I let you go, I'm looking at this Medibank hack. It's day after day, more data is being released. There's a class action now. Some estimates are that it's going to cost Medibank Private up to $1 billion. Are you worried, and what can be done about the knock-on effects of this? Not just the people that are having their data exposed, but the viability of Medibank going forward, the cost of premiums, and what that might mean for the taxpayer?
Yeah, well, exactly. And I'm a Medibank customer. I won't be joining up to any class actions, but I appreciate people are aggrieved by what's happened here. And this is where the government's been all care and no action. I mean, it's been a lot of empathy, but not a lot of action in terms of legislation increasing penalties. We've actually had a ransomware legislation that we wanted them to support as far back as September, and Claire O'Neill hasn't even lifted the pen to say, well, even if she doesn't like it, she could amend it to put some greater penalties and some greater protections around it. And I think this is the new warfare that we're going to have to face up to as a society, and corporates in particular are going to have to get better at this. But there has to be a line in the sand whereby we can't send businesses broke because of the actions of the scum of the earth in trying to pull out data. And data is the new currency that will be traded on the dark web. And I think we need to be cognizant of this. And as legislators, I think we need to work practically through this to make sure there's regulatory frameworks for big corporates, that they live up to expectations. And if they do, well, then they're protected from actions, monetary actions against them. But obviously, if they don't, well, then there has to be repercussions. But we need, as legislators, need to give them that framework. We need to come forward and be honest and be transparent with them, so they know what expectations in terms of regulation they're expected to maintain.
Yeah, it's a tough one, I tell you what, and there's no conclusion in sight at the moment. David Littleproud, thanks so much for your time as always. Busy week ahead.
Thanks.